Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. So today we're starting the second broadcast of the Barrett Academy Facebook Live. Today I'm going to be talking about why am I here? The 7 stages of psychological development. You may recall 2 weeks ago I covered the topic, who am I? And we looked at how to become a global citizen. So before I begin, I'd just like to say how much I'm really enjoying being in Italy for the summer. I'm making rapid progress on my book, Worldview Dynamics and Global Consciousness Indicators, and I'm hoping to have that book out very soon. I'm also happy to be here because we live in the countryside, and we had the amazing experience the other day. A fox turned up for lunch. We were sitting having lunch outside, and he just showed up and stood 15 feet away and walked around us and waiting for us to feed him. Well, we didn't, of course, because that would be interrupting his natural cycle. But we shooed him off, and then 3 minutes later he was back again. But what a beautiful spectacle to see a fox so close up and so healthy too. So enough of my personal meanderings. Let's get down to the topic of today, which is going to be the 7 stages of psychological development. As you know, and I already mentioned, in these Facebook Live broadcasts, I'm covering topics of personal transformation, organizational transformation, and the cultural transformation. And so if you want to have a article about today's broadcast, you can contact me at info@barrettacademy.com and I'll send it to you. So, what are we talking about? Who am I? Why am I here? The key to understanding the 7 stages of psychological development is that we have to recognize that we are souls having a human experience. The model that I have developed is very similar to many other developmental models, but it is different in one way. It looks at ego-soul dynamics. So, what are ego-soul dynamics? Well, I best explain that, I think, by talking about each of the stages of psychological development. So let's go back to the very beginning of your life. There was an egg and a seed in the womb of your mother, and that egg was fertilized. And from that moment, or very shortly thereafter, for the next 3 months, that embryo was guided into its development through what I call soul consciousness, the energetic dimension of who we are. And that is linked, of course, to DNA. And so after 3 months, what forms is the reptilian mind-brain. Now, the reptilian mind-brain is our body-mind, basically. And at the moment the body-mind forms and the heartbeat begins, the soul mind, which was there from the present from the moment of conception, becomes the subconscious of the body mind. The body mind is now our interface with the external world. And the body mind continues to develop in the womb up to the point of birth and through to the next 18 months. So during this first stage of development, I call it survival, the body mind is focused on one thing alone, and that's getting its physiological needs met. It wants to keep warm, it wants to have food, it wants a dry bottom, it wants to just feel good in its skin. Nothing else is really going on at a deep level except this need for survival. Gradually, over the first year or 18 months of after the birth of the child, the limbic mindbrain, let's call it the emotional mind, begins to develop in the background. And at the age around 18 months, that limbic mind brain becomes the dominant mind brain. And the body mind now becomes the subconscious of the emotional mind, and the soul mind becomes the unconscious of the emotional mind. So at this stage, the soul is still present, but less so than at the beginning. Now, the soul lives in a field of awareness where there is only love. It knows nothing about fear, and it knows nothing about separation. But something interesting is happening as this baby who feels totally connected to everything and is not aware of any objects in its field, it begins to realize that actually it doesn't get its needs met all of the time. It begins to feel uncomfortable. There are uncomfortable sensations in the body mind. And these uncomfortable sensations are repressed to the subconscious, which is the soul mind at this point. And the soul feels the pain of separation. It begins to realize that it's not living in this love field anymore, but it's living in potentially a field of pain. And so the soul mind does something very interesting. It creates a psychic entity called the ego. And so around 18 months, shortly thereafter, the ego begins to act as a buffer to the soul. It takes responsibility for this body. And it doesn't know that it's actually the guardian of the soul. It just takes the responsibility of surviving, and at this second stage of development, conforming, when the limbic mind brain or the emotional mind brain is growing and developing, it takes responsibility for safety. This is the fundamental focus of the second stage, conforming. So between the age of about 18 months and about 6 or 7 years of age, the emotional mind is dominant. And it's looking for protection, and it's looking for safety. Now, as I mentioned, at this point, when the emotional mind brain is dominant, the soul mind is actually the unconscious. The body mind is the subconscious. So the promptings of the soul are still vaguely felt, but around the age of 8, the reptilian mind brain, the neocortex, which has been growing and developing the background, now becomes dominant. It's not fully developed. In fact, it will not be fully developed until the age of around 22 or 23. And so now we have the dominant mind brain being the rational mind, the emotional mind being the subconscious, the body mind being the unconscious, and now the soul mind is like the super unconscious. So whereas in those first few years of life, the child may experience the soul mind, it has playmates who are invisible, for example. It's living at a very young age, very close to soul consciousness, but by the time it gets to 7 or 8 and the neocortex clicks in, that is no longer the case. So this rational mind goes on developing for the next 10, 12, 13, 14 years. And it isn't fully developed until we get to around 22, as I previously said. Well, what this means is that the teenagers don't have a fully developed mind brain. That's why teenagers do stupid things. I mean, you were a teenager once, I guess, unless you're a teenager now. I was a teenager also, and I did really stupid things. You probably did really stupid things. And the reason is simply this, that you didn't have a fully functioning mind brain. Now, whereas this first stage, surviving, the body mind is focused on getting its physiological needs met. The emotional mind at the second stage, conforming, is focused on getting its love needs met. It wants to feel a sense of belonging. It wants to feel protected. Now, the differentiating stage, when the neocortex or the rational mind becomes dominant, the needs of the teenager is to find respect and recognition in its peer group, because now this young person is out in the world. He was very protected up to the age of 8, but from 8 onwards, it's spending more and more time with its peers, and it wants to feel recognized. And it wants to feel recognized also by its parents. So if parents don't spend a lot of time with their teenage child, or if that teenage child is rebuffed from its peer group, can't find a group that it wants to belong to, it feels unrecognized. And this is extremely painful to the ego. Remember, the ego is buffering the soul all the time from this pain. Anyhow, so when you don't get your respect and recognition needs met in your teenage years, you will do anything to get recognized. And this is where we get, particularly in the USA, into school shooters. These are young teenagers who are not recognized by their peer group. They're not recognized by their parents. The parents don't really spend much time with them. And they're crying out to be recognized. And this is the point in time when there is where a lot of people begin to take their lives. And I say a lot of people. This is when the activity of killing yourself really begins. And it begins because we don't feel recognized. Suicide is a big problem, as we all know, and it usually arises from a failure to meet your needs, either your ego needs or your soul's needs. And when we get desperate about trying to meet those needs and they're not met, then we get very depressed, very sad, and it can lead to suicide. So these are the first 3 stages of psychological development. I call them the stages of development of the ego, because the ego is now fully in charge and protecting the body and the mind from all survival events, safety events, etc., or self-esteem events. It helps to keep you safe and also secure. Now, any fear-based beliefs that you learn during this period of your life will be deeply, how shall I put it, impregnated into your mind, into your neocortex, because you'll be forming synaptic connections during this whole period, because this is a period of emergent learning. Your body mind, your emotional mind, and your rational mind are all growing and developing. So any events during this period become hardwired synaptically, and they are very difficult to change later on. And this is the reason why almost everybody has problems. We have limiting beliefs about getting our needs met. We may believe that we don't have enough. We may believe we're not loved enough, or we may believe that we're not enough. And so this first period of life is fundamentally important to our adult years. So what happens next? So next comes the individuating stage. Now, actually, very few people on the planet reach the individuating stage, and I'll give you 3 reasons why. 1, they live in repressive autocratic regimes where freedom of speech and freedom of action are not allowed, because at the individuating stage we're looking for freedom, whereas at the differentiating stage we were looking for recognition. So that's the first reason. We're living in an autocratic regime, and many people, more than half the world's population, live in those regimes. Secondly, it could be that we develop these limiting fear-based beliefs about not having enough, not being loved enough, and not being enough during the first 20 years of our lives. And these beliefs play out over and over. Even when we do have enough or we are loved, these beliefs keep kicking in. They are triggered. And so we are constantly dropping back into that ego mind, which prevents us from moving forward into the soul mind, because the individuating stage is the bridge between the ego and the soul. It's where we begin to let go of all of the beliefs that we learned during those first 20 years of our lives, these fear-based beliefs, and let go of the conditioning of our parents and the culture we were brought up in. Now, if we were able to travel or get a higher education, moving to the individuating stage is a good possibility, but most of the world never gets that far. So we have regimes, authoritarian regimes that prevent us from individuating. We have the limiting beliefs that we form during our early years, preventing us from individuating. And actually, our physical circumstances in which we live may prevent us from individuating because we are poor. We live in a poor neighborhood. We're constantly struggling for survival and to feed our families. So we have no space in our mind to explore our growth needs, as Maslow called them. So that's where we find ourselves at the individuating stage. As I say, very few people are able to get to that stage. If you're at that stage, usually it's between the early 20s and late 30s. If you successfully get through the individuating stage, then you move to the self-actualizing stage, which usually begins late 30s and 40s. Now, having now let go of the beliefs and the values that we brought up in, we now have the possibility of forming our own values and connecting deeply with who we are and finding our true self-expression. Let me give you an example. Myself, I, for some reason, decided when I was 17 to go to university and graduate in transportation. And I had a very successful career up to the age of around 45. I was working at the World Bank, and then suddenly I was completely bored by my career. Many people get bored by their careers in their 40s. And I realized that all my life I'd been studying psychology, spirituality. And so when I was 17 and thinking about going to university, I thought I heard my soul say transportation. But I realized I must have been a bit deaf, because actually what my soul said was transformation. Anyhow, it didn't change anything. From that point on, I began to realize that I had to change my career. So how was that possible? Here I was, very successful, earning a 6-figure tax-free salary in the World Bank, and thinking to myself, well, this is not good. I need to do something else. It took me 6 or 7 years to get out of the World Bank and then move into doing what I love to do, which I've been doing ever since. And so that's self-actualization. You know, I used to watch these MasterChef or cooking shows where people came on and competed with each other, and they'd say, well, here's George, he's a veterinary surgeon, but what he really likes is to cook. Or somebody else who's, let's say, a nurse who has been nursing, but really what she likes to do is cook. And I think to myself, I wonder if actually that's their self-expression, because when you self-actualize, you want to find meaning and purpose in your life. That's what your ego tells you. But actually what your soul knows its meaning and purpose. What it wants to do is self-expression. Now, here's a very interesting link back to the first stage of development, the surviving stage, because if you learned as you were going through that stage that your needs were not met, you would have developed an imprint or a belief that it's difficult to survive in the world. And so that belief now clicks in when you get to the self-actualizing stage, or if you have that belief, and it may prevent you from doing what I did, for example, leaving the World Bank to do something that I had absolutely no qualifications in, and I had no income. And so that imprint or belief from the surviving stage could have played out and prevented me from self-actualizing and finding my true self-expression. It would have held me back, and I would have got sad, and I would have got depressed, and I would have not had a fulfilling life. So now I'm into my 40s, I'm finding my self-expression through self-actualization, and now I move to the next stage in the 50s, the integrating stage. Now, the ego labels this making a difference. Well, for the soul, making a difference is about connection. So it's all about connection. The 50s is about connecting with other people so you can make a difference, because you can't make a difference if you can't connect. I mean, it's obvious. So connecting is really important. Now, women have an advantage there because they learn early on how to get along with other girls at that second stage of development, whereas little boys at that second stage of development are told, don't show your feelings, be strong. If he hits you, hit him back. And so we learn that our feelings should not be expressed. And of course, when you get to the conforming stage, if you want to connect, you have to connect through your feelings. You have to connect through empathy. And we don't have it because it was beaten out of us in a sense. So that's the problem for men when they get to the individuating stage of development. And if they fail or if they find it very difficult to connect, there's a link back from the stage of development to our physical body, to the chakra system, and they finish up with prostate cancer. Prostate cancer takes off significantly around mid to late 50s. Women, on the other hand, have difficulties in the previous stage, the self-actualizing stage, because when you're in your 40s, women, you usually have a husband. He'll always have some needs. That goes without saying. You will have children, they will have needs, and you will have aging parents who may have needs. And so who comes last? Well, you do. And so you're not able, or you don't find the time to self-express, because you put all of these people before you. And that leads to breast cancer and thyroid problems in the late 40s. In fact, that fifth chakra. So there are problems when you fail to learn how to move through a stage of development, particularly the upper stages of development, which are really dependent on your ability to master the fears that came from the first three stages of development. Now we're up to the integrating stage, which is usually the 50s, and we get to the next stage, which is serving. Now, this is the 60s and beyond. Now, whereas in the 50s, we were all interested in connecting so we could make a difference, in the 60s, it's all about contribution. We just want to make a contribution to the world. You know, at this point, we don't care if we get paid or not. We just want to make a contribution. It's what our lives are about. Now, if in the differentiating stage, you were not recognized, that's that third stage, teenage stage. If you were not recognized, you will not feel confident going out into the world and making a contribution. And so a failure to contribute in the 60s leads to issues of the brain, Alzheimer's, all of the things that can go wrong with the thinking process. And so here you have the 7 stages of psychological development. We all go through them. They are one after another. You can't leapfrog. But one of the comments I often get from millennials, bless their souls, is that, oh yeah, and these are the people in the late 20s and 30s, they say, yeah, but all I want to do is make a difference. I must be at the integrating stage of development. Well, this is not true. I have many friends at that age, and this is what I explain to them, that making a difference, actually, where is that need coming from? And for those millennials, the need is coming from a sense of achievement. They want to be able to show that they are good at something, because in that individuating stage, we're finding freedom, and we're looking for autonomy, and we want to prove ourselves. And so not only are they looking for achievement, but they're also looking to correct the wrongs in society. And so the focus or the source of making a difference comes from these needs. And whereas at the integrating stage, making a difference, connecting, at that stage, making a difference comes from a sense of empathy, a sense of connection to the other people. You want to help them change their lives. So there we have it. We have these 7 stages of psychological development. How well you manage to master the first 3 stages during the first 20 odd years of your life will very much affect how well you're able to master the last 3 stages. The middle stage, individuating, means that you have to be able to find freedom and autonomy to be who you are and to leave behind the parental and cultural conditioning that you had at that stage. And the latter stages, 3 stages, are really all about soul activation. And if you want to lead a long life, a healthy life, a fulfilling life, you need to pass through all of these stages. You need to feel this sense of fulfillment when you get to your 60s and 70s and 80s and maybe 90s. My mother lived to be 100. I wouldn't say that she was fully self-actualized, but she was able to live a healthy, long life, I think to a large extent by mastering her fears. And the way she mastered her fears was actually to not to move out into the world. She was a little bit deaf, and so she found it a little fearful to go out into the world. So she lived in my terms, what I would call a small existence in a little suburb. She served the community. She contributed to the community until she was in her mid-80s by cleaning the local Methodist chapel. So she was contributing. She was out there 2 or 3 times a week cleaning the chapel. And then when there were burials or services, a wedding, burials, etc., she would go to the chapel, make sure it was clean, make sure flowers were everywhere, and she was known as the chapel flower arranger. So she found a way of contributing, even though she didn't have a high education, she found a way of contributing to the local community, and consequently, she lived to be 100. She did all her aging basically in the last year of her life. So I'm going to stop there. I'm going to tell you that if you want to find out more about the 7 stages of psychological development, there's lots of resources. You can go to the Academy website where you can find more information. If you send me an email at info@barrettacademy.com, I'll send you my latest version of the stages of psychological development, which I just finished today, fresh off the news. And of course, I've written quite a few books on the topic. This one, the evolutionary coaching, helps coaches to integrate the 7 stages of psychological development into their coaching practice. And this book, the New Psychology of Human Wellbeing, goes even deeper. It explains the link between the stages of psychological development, the chakra system, the leading causes of death, depression, etc., etc., etc. So if you want to go into great detail, I highly recommend this book. If you're a coach, then I recommend evolutionary coaching. So that's it for today. I hope you enjoyed it. Just a few words about not next week, but 2 weeks from now. These happen every 2 weeks. And I'll be talking again on May the 10th. My topic for May the 10th will be the 7 levels of consciousness. Today I've been talking about the stages of psychological development. I'll be talking about the 7 levels of consciousness, and you can do some pre-work for that broadcast. If you go to www.valuesplural-center.com/PVA, personal values assessment, valuescenter.com/PVA, then you can do a personal value assessment. It's absolutely free, and you complete the assessment in about 5 minutes, and 2 or 3 minutes later you'll get back your results where you'll see which levels of consciousness you're operating from. Now, on that same page where you land, in order to do the PVA, you'll find another link to a self-paced learning course around understanding the results of your PVA. So I highly recommend that. Up to date, the last 3 or 4 years, 800,000 people in the world have done the PVA. So you can be one of them. So that's it from me. I'll look forward to talking to you in 2 weeks. It goes by very quickly. So put me in your diary, and I'm looking forward to see you then. Okay, bye.